Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the top 10 topics of today, that is November 2nd, 2021. Let us look at what are the topics that I will be discussing with you today. India will achieve net zero emissions by 2070 is something of a big statement that was made by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the COP26 in Glasgow. Cannot impose a blanket ban on all firecrackers, says Supreme Court just before the festival of Diwali. Sign off on Paris Rulebook, says the basic group of countries. UK vows action if France does not back down in a fishing row. Rescue guide launched for the Ganges River dolphin. Sri Lanka fishers leader meets Indian envoy. MNREGA low funds, caste based payment delays, and implications for the economy is an editorial. Infrastructure resilience for small island states is another editorial. And why counting the caste matters is an editorial of the Hindu. So, India will achieve net emissions by 2070, says Pradhan Mantri Narendra Modi. Now, he made some big ticket announcements at the climate summit at Glasgow, which he called as Panchamrit. A 1 billion ton reduction in emissions from now until 2030, says the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is the first time that India has taken any climate target in terms of absolute emission reductions in the form of 1 billion ton reduction. The country's emission intensity or emissions per unit GDP will be reduced by at least 45% by the year 2030 from the 2005 levels. In the existing target, India had promised to reduce its emissions by 33 to 35% by that date. India is currently the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, releasing over 3 billion tons every year. And the total greenhouse gas emissions, if we see in 2018, was 3.3 billion tons, up from 2.5 billion tons in 2010. As per this projected rate, Indian emissions between now and 2030 will be 32 to 33 billion tons. Now, India emissions are rising at about 4 to 5% every year. So, the total emissions between now and 2030 is expected to be higher, in the range of about 40 billion ton. It is in this amount that the 1 billion ton reduction will happen. Incidentally, Prime Minister Modi did not make any mention of the forestry target, the only one that India is struggling to achieve. Of the three promises made in the Paris Climate Change Agreement are creating a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion carbon sink, reducing the carbon intensity, and increasing the non-fossil fuel energy to the total energy mix. However, India is struggling to achieve the carbon sink. This is related to the land requirement for various infrastructure projects that India is facing a challenge from. Of particular concern for India is the commitment of 100 billion every year as climate finance to developing countries, says Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And therefore, he pushes hard for transfer of technology and finance to help the developing countries and also to build a resilient infrastructure for the small island states. The next most important topic is cannot impose a blanket ban on the firecrackers, says the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court said that there cannot be a complete ban on firecrackers and instead stressed the need to strengthen the mechanism to stop their misuse. And this comes over a petition while hearing an appeal from the High Court of Calcutta. Now the Supreme Court ruling comes just days ahead of Kali Puja, Diwali and festivals. The court's ruling comes at a time when the Calcutta High Court had ordered a ban on the sale and use of all firecrackers during Diwali, Chhat Puja and other festivities to check the air pollution amid the COVID-19. The Supreme Court asked the West Bengal government to ensure that the banned materials are not imported. The High Court order was challenged by the dealers who referred to the 2020 orders of the NGT allowing the use of green crackers. Let me tell you, in 2018, the Supreme Court had banned the use of dangerous crackers which emit poisonous substances and allowed the use of green crackers. CBI also found several kilograms of barium, which is a banned substance, is being used by the firecracker manufacturers. This showed that the implementations agencies lack the desire to implement the directions of the court. Let us see what the Supreme Court said in its 2018 order. In October 2018, the Supreme Court banned production and sale of all the crackers except green crackers and those which reduced emissions with reduced emissions. It had also banned manufacture sale of joint crackers, prohibited the use of barium salts in firework, and said that the noise level should be within the permissible levels. The court also banned their online sale and directed that they can be sold only through licensed traders and laid down the time schedule for bursting of the crackers on various occasions. PISO, that is a Petroleum Explosive Safety Organization, has been entrusted with the task of approving the cracker. So, in the right side box, you can see that I've just given a description of what are green crackers. They are being developed by CSIR, National Environmental Engineering Research Institute. Production after it is approved by the PISO, that is Petroleum and Explosive Safety Organization. They are green because they have a chemical formulation that produces water molecules. This substantially reduces the emission levels and absorbs the dust. It is light and sound shows that it produces lower emissions. Promise of 30 to 35% reduction in particulate matter, nitrous oxide and sulfur oxide. So the firecrackers that are less dangerous and less harmful chemicals than the conventional ones are called as green crackers. E-crackers are also being developed by CSIR, Central Electronics Engineering Research Institute. The next most important news is the ministers call for signing off a Paris Rulebook to implement the Paris Agreement. Now, at the opening day of the 26th United Nations Conference of Parties, our Environmental Minister Bhupendra Yadav delivered a statement on behalf of the basic groups of countries which constitute Brazil, South Africa, India and China. Let us remember these countries also are a part of the BRICS grouping at the United Nations Climate Conference underway in Glasgow. These countries are seeking long-term climate finance goal from the developed countries, which has not been still implemented properly. Now, these major developing economies are polluters but bear the diminished responsibilities for carbon dioxide that has been pumped into the atmosphere since 1850, that has been caused by the developed countries such as US, UK, etc., and also have low per capita emissions because of their significant population. Now, these countries have for therefore many years sought to rebuff the pressure from developed countries to take on firmer emission reductions. So, the environmental minister said that a key demand of the basic was that the Paris Climate Agreement Rulebook should be concluded at the COP26. While the Paris Agreement laid down the framework for international action, the rule book will set this agreement into motion by laying down the tools and processes that will enable it to be implement the agreement fairly and properly. Now, India wants the rule book to give effect to the principle of equity but common and differentiated responsibility, respective capabilities. The minister reiterated basic demands on climate finance and adaptation as well. So, what is the Paris Rulebook? Now, in 2018, Paris Rulebook governs the world community of 119 countries that must pledge emission reductions targets under the Paris Agreement, which is a successor of the Kyoto Protocol. And then they have to report on this progress. It also contains provisions for rich countries to provide climate action finance to developing countries. In 2018, at Katowice, Poland, countries agreed on the Paris Rulebook for guidelines on implementing Paris Agreement. So, the Paris Rulebook is aimed to implement the Paris Agreement. The rulebook tells us how the commitments will be implemented and what are the obligations of the countries towards these commitments. What is the Paris Agreement then? The Paris Agreement is an agreement on cutting the greenhouse gas emissions which are causing global warming. It was adopted by 200 countries in France on December 12, 2015 and came into force in 2016. Simply saying, it is a guide to climate change. So, what was agreed? Now, to pursue efforts to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degree and to keep them well before 2 degree above the pre-industrial times was agreed in the Paris Agreement to limit greenhouse gas emissions from human activities at the same levels that the trees, soils, ocean can absorb, known as net zero between 2050 and 2100 was agreed in the Paris Agreement. Each country to set its own emission reduction targets reviewed after every 5 years in the form of NDCs. Rich countries must help the poorer countries by providing finance known as climate finance to adapt to the climate change and to switch to renewable energy. So, these were the 4 points that were agreed in the Paris Agreement. Now, the next most important issue is a rescue guide has been launched by the Jal Shakti Ministry for protecting and conserving the Ganges River dolphin. Now, the Jal Shakti Ministry released a guide for safe rescue and release of the Ganges River dolphin. They are found throughout Ganges, the Brahmaputra, Meghna, Karnafuli, Sangu rivers of Nepal, India, Bangladesh. The Ganges River dolphin is an indicator of the healthy aquatic systems. Only 3 species of the freshwater dolphins are remaining on the earth after the extinction of the Chinese river dolphin called as Baiji in 2006. The document was prepared by the Turtle Survival Alliance, India Program and Environment, Forest and Climate Change Department, Uttar Pradesh. The guide has been drawn from years of experience of the organization after rescuing 25 Ganges River dolphins. Now, the Ganges River dolphins are designated as the national aquatic animal of India since 2010 and they are listed as an endangered species under the IUCN Red List assessment. They are also protected under the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Appendix 1 of the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Now, the species whose global population is estimated to be 4,000, 80% of it is found in the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, this conservation guide is of utmost importance. They often enter the canal channels in northern India and they are entrapped and therefore die as they are unable to swim against the gradient, getting stressed and harassed by locals also. Though the manual by the ministry has endorsed details of identification of the species and on-site and off-site operations. The off-site operations include permit and equipment, while on-site involves crowd control, capturing, handling, transfer, transport and release. Now, the document says that the river dolphin faces many threats in Ganga basin. Dwindling population can be attributed to habitat degradation from pollution, hydroelectric development projects, industrial runoff, as well as accidental death via entanglement in fishing nets or by villagers from curiosity, poaching for meat and oil in certain pockets of the country. The next most important issue is about the aftermath of Brexit. Now, UK vows action if France does not back down on the fishing row. So, these are regarding the fishing rights post Brexit between UK and France. So, as I said, this is with regard to the post Brexit fishing rights. Now, France is angry that Britain and the Channel Islands of Jersey have not issued some French boats with licenses to fish in their waters since the Brexit took effect at the start of 2021. Paris, that is France, vowed that unless the licenses are approved, it will ban the UK boats from uploading their catches at French ports and impose checks on all products brought to France from Britain. The feud over the fish has already seen British trawler detained in the French port, and Paris ambassador was summoned in London. Britain is facing the prospect of another fallout with its closest neighbour over the post Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland. Now, London is threatening to walk away from the pact, which is designed to keep an open border between the British province and EU members of Ireland, while ensuring that it is not used as a gateway for non EU goods to illegally enter the single market. The pro UK unionists in Northern Ireland believe that by imposing the checks on goods heading to Britain province from England, Scotland, Wales threatens its place in the wider UK. The next important is with regard to the fisher leaders meet with the Indian envoy. Now, Sri Lanka has concerns about the use of bottom trawlers by the fishermen and also crossing over into the international boundary line for fishing, which is violating the agreement between India and Sri Lanka. Now, the Indian side has agreed twice in 2010 and 16 to phase out and end the practice of bottom trawling, but it has not done yet, and this has been complained to the Indian envoy. Fishermen from Tamil Nadu are crossing the international maritime boundary line and fishing in Sri Lankan waters, causing harmful bottom trawling fishing method, which has been a recurring flashpoint in India and Sri Lanka ties. The next important is about the MNREGA funds, and it is about a report by two agencies that have done a sort of a social audit on this program. MNREGA, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. We had seen that the demand for employment was very high, especially during the pandemic period, and it was a savior in a sort to the rural people, especially the migrants who had come away from the cities, and they were taking rescue to the MNREGA for them to have liquidity and to have purchasing power so that they can be secured when there was a lockdown and the organizations and the total economy was in a shutdown mode. So let's see what does the MNREGA tracker that is released by these agencies say. So they have come out with some startling findings, especially at a time when there is demand for a caste census, and also the how the MNREGA plays a very important role in absorbing the unemployment and also providing a push to the economy by providing money in the hands of the wage earners so that there is demand and supply. Now, last week, two organizations that track the implementation of MNREGA brought out a report called as MNREGA Tracker by using the government's own MIS data. These two organizations are called as People Actions for Employment Guarantee, and the other one is LibTech India. So this is the fourth such tracker on MNREGA, and it is very significant for a simple reason that the program's performance is the most important proxy for the health of informal economy, which accounts for 80 to 90% of employment in India. So let us see what are the important highlights of the finding. Now, MNREGA, as an introduction, let me tell you, was enacted in 2005. It was seen as a response to deep economic distress that existed in rural India at that time when farming was proving to be unremunerative and as the cities failed to create adequate job opportunities. Thus, the MNREGA was started to provide a lifeline to millions of rural households. It did so by letting the government provide the people 100 days of guaranteed guaranteed employment in a year to any rural household or family at minimum wages. Now, the government thought that between a bare minimum payout through this rural job guarantee scheme on one hand and expanding the subsidized food grains on the other, the government will be able to make the growth process more inclusive. Soon, the performance of MNREGA became most visible measure of economy's health. It was also expected that if the Indian economy is booming and creating new jobs, one therefore should expect a less demand of jobs under MNREGA. And conversely, if the economy is struggling, MNREGA was seen to have high levels of activity. Therefore, it was taken to be as a barometer of the economic growth. As it turned out, MNREGA continued to gain popularity among the rural Indians during the phase of India's economic life. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he came to power in 2014, he described the MNREGA as the politics of dole, and therefore the Prime Minister's statement not only captured the harsh reality of the economic growth but also explained the rationale for MNREGA. So, let me tell you in brief that the program was actually criticized by the opposition at that time, calling the government at that time that they are still making the rural people to dig holes, just making a mockery of the type of growth India is experiencing. So, what does the tracker actually find? Now, the main takeaways from the tracker are inadequate allocation and repeated payment delays have been found in the MNREGA. The first finding has to do with the Government of India not allocating adequate funds for MNREGA in the budget. We should keep in mind again and again that this program provided distress employment or even on-time employment to many of the unorganized sector workers and helped in spurring the rural economic growth. Now, according to this organization, the total budget allocation for MNREGA was 34 years in 2020-21. At one level, this is surprising since this year's budget even saw the central government cutting down on the health budget. If the government can cut on health budget by 10% after being struck by COVID pandemic, it is not surprising that the MNREGA would also see a cut. Since inadequate budget allocation is an annual occurrence, each year's budget allocation also had to contend with the previous year's errors, and this is an important point to be noted. In the current year, for example, the total allocation of MNREGA was 70,000 crore. Over 17,000 crore will be used to just pay off the payments to rural poor for the work they did in the last financial year. Now, as per the Act, all the labour wages are to be paid by the central government. In the past, Supreme Court has also pulled up the central government for causing delays in the wage payments. The other important point is demand suppression. Now, another key takeaway is inadequate allocation to the MNREGA. There are two important legislative provisions in the MNREGA. One is that they should be provided within 15 days of demand work, failing which the employees, the workers, are entitled to unemployment allowance. 2. The workers should be paid within 15 days of completion of the work, failing which they will be given compensation. If due to inadequate budget allocation, the delays, the rural workers do not get the dues in time, it discourages them and therefore they do not come forward to ask for work. And therefore, the less allocation in the MNREGA is seen as something that to suppress the demand for work under MNREGA because when there is less allocation, the wages are not paid on time. When the wages are not paid on time, the workers do not come for demand of work because they are aware that the wages will not come in time or in their hands, and therefore they do not come and ask for work at the MNREGA. The other important finding is caste-based payment delays. This is the unique factor, let me tell you, that the tracker found out. So the tracker seen that in the funds transfer order, instead of just one MNREGA payment, the union government had asked the state to give 3 fund transfer orders for three MNREGA payments, that is, one for scheduled castes, one for scheduled tribes, and the other categories. This is crucial because the workers belonging to the other categories accounted for 87% of the MNREGA workers. And after asking for these fund transfer orders, it was seen that the wage payment for the SC/ST was faster compared to the other category workers. Therefore, this brought about a sort of social divide and also a difference and a conflict among these communities who constituted the MNREGA workers. They were also seen as being looked down, and also biased feeling was felt among the other category workers. Now, what does a professor of economics, that is Jayati Ghosh, say about these findings? She says that Indian economy cannot really recover unless the domestic demand recovers, and that in turn requires a recovery in mass consumption, which has been languishing during the pandemic period, and this is very true. So, MNREGA plays a very critical role, especially for reviving the rural India. To be sure, many ground level researchers have pointed out that the delays have resulted in caste based tensions at the work sites. A self targeted program like MNREGA that puts money in the hands of workers who will definitely spend all of it is quite different. In addition to the immediate improvement of lives and also bargaining conditions for rural workers. Therefore, it has a strong positive multiplier effect in the rural economy. So, the government has to look into the matter of inadequate allocations. Also, it should not be suppressing the demand of work for the MNREGA workers, and caste based payments should be stopped immediately if the social tension has to be reduced. Infrastructure resilience for small island states. Now, Infrastructure Resilience for Small Island States, or IRIS, is the first major initiative by the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which was started by India in 2019. The initiative was launched by Pradhan Mantri Modi and his British counterpart Boris Johnson at the 26th session of Glasgow, presently going on. So, what is CDRI? It is a climate proof critical infrastructure where 26 member countries are included, involving US, Germany, UK, Australia, Brazil, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Japan are already part of the coalition. The coalition, let me remind you again, does not create any new infrastructure. Rather, it just serves as a knowledge center for the member countries to share and learn the best practices with respect to disaster proofing. It will work towards making existing and upcoming infrastructure more robust and resilient. So, who are the small island nations? Let us see. And how are they affected? The small island states account for less than 1% of the global greenhouse gases, but they are among the most vulnerable of all the locations due to the adverse effects of climate change and sea level rise. They are affected by sea level rise, flood risk, storm surges, beach and coastal changes, changes to coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrasses. Biodiversity of these islands is affected. Food security, especially fisheries and agriculture and livelihood, is under threat. Economic growth is hit. Societies become vulnerable and also lost to the government exchequer. Many of them are located in the Caribbean Sea, Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean, Pacific, and the Indian Ocean. So we can see here there are certain islands in the Caribbean Sea and certain islands in Africa. I've shown you certain islands even in the Indian Ocean. I think it's not very much clear, but definitely at the weekend when I give you the weekly roundup of the current affairs, you will find it in that issue. Now, according to the CDRI, every $1 invested in making the infrastructure more resilient in low and middle income countries can save up to $4 when the disaster strikes. So, there is a widespread acknowledgement that despite the actions by countries to fight climate change, the frequency and extremacy of the events are increasing, and therefore the small island states are bearing the brunt of these. India's coastal communities, especially Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, are also also facing more powerful and frequent cyclones every year. Now, the aim of CDRI is to minimize the damage and disruptions. CDRI is India's second international climate initiative. The first was the International Solar Alliance. It was launched at 2015 Paris Climate Change Conference. The other main project by India at the international level with respect to climate change is International Solar Alliance, whose main objective is to promote large scale harnessing and exploitation of solar energy. And to take the idea forward, the One Sun, One World, One Grid proposes a common grid through more than 100 countries. Therefore, what is IRIS now? As the One Sun, One World, One Grid, it is a specific work program to realize the objectives of ISA. IRIS will seek to operationalize the CDRI initiative. Small island states that are most vulnerable to climate change, as sea level rise, they face the threat of being wiped off the map. And according to CDRI, several small island states have lost 9% of their GDPs in a single disaster during the last few years. The IRIS platform will draw up plans for implementation, and the bulk of the work would involve mobilizing and directing financial resources towards building of resilient infrastructure in these states. The next editorial is from Hindu. It says the writer highlights uh, the need for a caste census, addresses the concerns that have to be looked into, and also argues the process that should be taken up. So, what are the main points that will help one to write an answer? The debate whether the census should collect the data of general and other backward classes have been argued by public intellectuals, politicians, and government administrators for decades. As the census conducts only the SC/ST data, it fails to provide comprehensive data on India's caste hierarchy. The purpose for collecting caste-wise data in the decennial census is to understand the inequality. This data is crucial to understand how the castes intersect with class, gender, regionality, and to access resources. The collected caste data should be available for use. In this regard, the caste data should continue as the existing practice of the Office of Registrar General of India to make the caste census data publicly available. So, why do we need the caste census data? In absence of a detailed caste data, we fail to name and confront major problems of society and leave the space for opportunistic politicians to exploit the caste and miss the opportunity to craft inclusive policies for those who are left backward. Some criticize it as a waste of public resource, but then they forget that the same societal institutions, systems, and cultural norms that have led to historical and ongoing subjugation of the caste have simultaneously empowered others to become more powerful and richer. Now, the bureaucracy tasked with designing the caste questions and overseeing the collection data have caste based inequities entrenched within them, also, the writer says. And they have suppressed the collection of the caste data, saying it will affect the integrity of the whole exercise. Now, following the suppression of the caste data in Census 2011, the executive bureaucracy reconfigured the below poverty line and renamed it as socio-economic caste census. The writer then says that it is therefore important to have the caste data so that to wipe out inequalities and to look into the policies which can be crafted for more inclusiveness. What are the concerns then that have to be addressed? Some progressive and anti-caste scholars fear that the full caste count will entrench caste identities. The data will provide a complete picture of exclusion and inequality. Another concern is that the groups may misuse the caste data. Political parties might use the data for mobilizing votes. Collecting caste data in the census removes this private power by making caste data publicly available. While the logistics challenge are real, they can be dealt with, says the writer. Demographers in the government agencies and universities have experienced work through this, and therefore they know and they are aware of the challenges of collecting such data. For example, the writer says that the vast amount of caste data that have been collected in the Indian Human Development Survey. It suggests the importance only of careful planning to prevent the groups from made visible in the data, such as Dalit Muslims, Dalit Christians, intercaste, and interreligious households. It must be seen that these groups are not left out in the data. Now, as the entire process requires external and as the process unfolds, a public oversight group should work to ensure operational and methodological designs align with the data collection's purpose. So, this brings me to the end of the top 10 topics for this day. I will meet you tomorrow with another list of the topics. Until then, bye bye.